Every clematis vine sold in America belongs to one of three groups. Each group follows completely different rules for pruning, for timing, and for care. But the tag on your plant probably never told you which group you bought, and every piece of pruning advice you have followed since bringing that vine home only works if it matches your group. The good news is you can figure out which group you have in about 10 seconds with one single question. Once you know the answer to that question, everything about your clematis suddenly makes sense. Why it blooms when it does, why it stopped blooming after you pruned it, when to cut, when to leave it alone, and exactly what it needs from you right now in late July. So let me give you that question, walk you through what each answer means, and then tell you precisely what to do for your vine this week. The question is simple, and it starts with your vine's bloom cycle. When did your clematis bloom last? That single answer sorts every clematis into its correct group. And once you know your group, you stop guessing. You stop following advice meant for a completely different vine. You start working with the plant instead of against it. If your clematis bloomed in spring, somewhere between April and May, with large flowers appearing on last year's woody stems, you have a Group 1 clematis. The varieties in this group include Montana, Almandii, Alpina, and Macropetala. These are the early spring performers, and they bloom exclusively on old wood. That means the stems that grew last summer and survived through winter are the ones carrying this year's flowers. The vine climbing your trellis or arbor right now, pushing out new green growth in the July heat, is building next spring's bloom. Every new shoot extending toward the sunlight, every leaf unfurling along the fence, is forming the wood that will carry flowers 8 or 9 months from now. This is the single most important thing to understand about Group 1. The flowers you want next April are being built right now, inside stems that look like they are just growing leaves. Those stems are doing much more than producing leaves. And this biological fact is what makes Group 1 pruning so different from the other two groups. You can tell old wood from new wood by looking at the stems closely. Old wood has a darker, slightly woody bark, sometimes a grayish-brown color, and it feels firm and stiff when you run your fingers along it. New wood, the growth from this current season, is greener, more flexible, and the stems are noticeably thinner. On a Group 1 vine in July, you will see both types on the same plant, older woody stems from last year, branching into fresh green growth, extending outward. That fresh green growth is what matters most right now. Now, if your clematis bloomed in late spring and then blooms again in late summer, producing 2 separate flushes of flowers each year, you have a Group 2 clematis. This is the group that confuses gardeners more than any other, and for good reason. Group 2 includes the large flowered hybrids that garden centers sell by the thousands. Nellie Moser with her pale pink striped petals, the President in deep purple, Henry I in creamy white, Dr. Ruppel in rich carmine with darker bars, Niobe in velvety dark red. These are the showstoppers, and they are also the most complicated to prune because they use both old and new wood to produce flowers. The first flush in late spring comes on old wood, just like Group 1. The second flush in late summer and early fall comes on new wood, the stems growing right now. So when you stand in front of a Group 2 clematis with pruning shears in your hand, you are looking at a vine that needs 2 different types of stems to produce its full flower display. Cut the wrong ones at the wrong time, and you lose an entire flush. That is why so many gardeners with beautiful Group 2 varieties end up with half the flowers they should be getting. They prune as if they have a Group 1 or a Group 3, and the vine pays the price. Pay attention to the difference between those 2 bloom windows, because it explains everything about how Group 2 should be handled in July. If your clematis bloomed in summer, or is blooming right now, producing flowers entirely on this year's new growth from June through September, you have a Group 3 clematis. This group includes some of the most vigorous and forgiving vines in the garden. Jackmanii, the classic deep purple that covers entire walls. Ville de Lion in cherry red and Étoile Violette in rich violet are both popular choices in this group. Polish Spirit produces a saturated purple-blue that photographs beautifully against a white fence. And Sweet Autumn, with clouds of tiny, fragrant white flowers, can cover a 20-foot arbor by September. Group 3, Clematis, bloom on new wood only. This means that every flower you see on the vine right now grew from a stem that did not exist in March. The entire above-ground portion can be cut back hard every late winter, and the vine regrows completely from the crown and roots to produce a full season of flowers on fresh stems. This is the simplest group to manage, and it is the reason experienced gardeners often recommend Group 3 varieties to anyone who has been burned by pruning confusion in the past. The difference between these three groups comes down to one biological principle: where the flower buds form, old wood, new wood, or both. Once you understand that single concept, everything else follows logically. The pruning rules, the timing, the July care, all of it traces back to this one question of where the buds develop. Now, there is one more possibility. Your clematis has never bloomed, not once, and you are starting to wonder if you bought a dud. You probably did not. There is an old gardening saying that goes, first year it sleeps, second year it creeps, third year it leaps. And while that rhyme has been repeated for generations, almost nobody explains the actual biology behind it. A clematis needs to build a crown, that woody base just below the soil surface, with enough stored carbohydrates to fuel two extremely energy-expensive processes at the same time: vegetative growth, meaning stems and leaves, and flower production. In year 1 and year 2, the crown simply cannot afford to do both. The carbohydrate bank account is too small, so the plant makes a survival decision. It chooses roots and stems over flowers, because survival always comes before reproduction in the plant world. The vine is not lazy or failing. It is investing every calorie of energy it can capture from sunlight into building a root system and a crown large enough to fund the flower show later. By year 3, the carbohydrate bank is large enough to pay for both growth and blooms simultaneously, and the vine explodes with flowers as if it has been holding them back, which, in a biological sense, it has. So feeding and watering your young clematis generously in those first 2 quiet years is not wasted effort. You're building the bank balance that pays for the flowers. Every scoop of compost, every deep watering session in the summer heat is filling the account that funds the display in year 3. One practical tip for young clematis that makes a real difference: plant the crown 2 to 3 inches below the soil surface, deeper than it sat in the nursery pot. This does 2 things. It protects the crown from extreme cold in winter, and it gives the plant more underground nodes from which to send up new stems if the above-ground growth is damaged by weather, by wilt, or by an accidental pruning mistake. A deeply planted young clematis is more resilient and develops a stronger crown faster than one planted at the same depth it came in. Before we move on to the July care for each group, there is one scenario that terrifies gardeners and leads to perfectly good clematis vines being ripped out of the ground. It needs to be addressed because it mimics death so convincingly that even experienced growers get fooled. Clematis wilt. One day your vine is climbing beautifully, green and lush against the trellis. The next morning, every stem above a certain point is black, wilted, and hanging like wet string. It looks like the vine died overnight. The whole thing just collapsed from the top down, and every leaf is hanging limp and brown. This is caused by a fungus called calzonectria, and it enters the stem through a single wound, usually a spot where a stem got nicked by a trellis wire or scraped during a windstorm. The fungus kills the stem tissue rapidly from that infection point upward, and the damage spreads so fast that the entire vine above ground can look completely dead within a day or 2. The visual is dramatic and scary, especially if you've been nurturing that vine for years. And this is where the mistake happens. The gardener sees the destruction, assumes the whole plant is gone, pulls it out of the ground, and throws it in the compost. That clematis was almost certainly still alive below the soil line. Clematis wilt only kills the above-ground stems. The root system and the crown below soil level are almost always perfectly healthy and ready to regrow. If your clematis collapses like this, cut every wilted stem to the ground immediately. Wipe your pruning shears with rubbing alcohol between cuts to avoid spreading the fungus. Then water the base and wait. The vine will often regrow from the crown within weeks, pushing fresh new stems up through the soil as if it is starting its spring growth all over again. And many clematis that recover from wilt never get the disease again. If you lost a clematis to what looked like sudden overnight death in a past season and you pulled it out, there is a very good chance it would have come back if you had just cut the dead stems to the ground and given it time. This is one of those gardening lessons that stings a little when you learn it, but it saves vines from that point forward. You can reduce the risk of wilt by being careful about how you handle the stems when tying them to supports. Clematis stems are brittle, especially at the nodes where leaves emerge, and even a small crack in the bark can become an entry point for the fungus. Use soft ties, not wire or rough twine that can abrade the surface. When training a stem around a trellis support, bend it gently over several days rather than forcing a sharp turn in one motion. Good air circulation around the base of the vine also helps, because the calconectria fungus thrives in warm, humid, still conditions close to the soil. Now let us get into exactly what each group needs from you right now in the heat of July. Group 1. Your vine finished blooming 2 to 3 months ago. Right now it is in full growth mode, pushing new stems, unfurling new leaves, reaching and climbing across your trellis or fence or arbor. Every inch of that new growth is forming the flower buds for next April and May. This is not just decorative expansion. This is next year's flower show being assembled inside those stems, bud by bud, node by node. Do not prune any of this green growth. Resist the urge to trim it back because it looks unruly or is flopping over the edge of the trellis, and leave the shape alone even if the vine has grown lopsided. Every stem you cut right now is next spring's flowers, and those buds cannot be replaced this season. The only pruning allowed in July for Group 1 is the removal of genuinely dead wood, stems that are brown, brittle, completely leafless, and snap when you bend them. Those are done. Everything green and growing stays. What you should do instead of pruning is guide the new growth. Tie new stems gently to your trellis or support structure with soft garden twine or stretchy plant ties. Position them where you want flowers next spring. The vine will set buds along these stems over the coming months, so where you train them now is where the flowers will appear in April. A little guidance in July pays off beautifully in spring. Feed your Group 1 clematis with a balanced fertilizer or a layer of good compost spread around the base, keeping the material away from the main stem. The vine is using significant energy right now to build both new growth and next year's buds, and it needs the nutrients to sustain that effort. Water deeply once a week if you have not had rain. Clematis roots need consistent moisture, especially in July heat, and a deep soak is far more effective than frequent light sprinkles that only wet the surface. If you do not already have mulch over the root zone, now is a good time to add it. A 2 to 3 inch layer of shredded bark or leaf mulch holds moisture in the soil between waterings, keeps the root temperature cooler during heat waves, and slowly breaks down to feed the soil biology that your clematis depends on. Group 2. This is where deadheading becomes your most important July task. Your Group 2 clematis had its first flush of flowers in late spring, and if you deadheaded those spent blooms properly, the vine should be pushing new growth right now that will carry the second flush in August and September. The correct deadheading method for Group 2 is to cut each spent flower stem just above the first set of full-sized healthy leaves below the old flower head, not down to the ground, not back to the main stem, just above those first strong leaves. This preserves the maximum amount of stem and leaf tissue to power the second round of blooms, while removing the spent flowers that are diverting energy into seed production instead of new flower buds. If you did not deadhead after the first flush, do it now. Walk the vine and remove every dried flower head you can find, cutting just above the nearest set of healthy leaves. You are behind schedule, but the vine can still redirect energy toward the second bloom if you act this week. Feed your Group 2 clematis with a tomato fertilizer, something with a high potassium formula. Potassium is the nutrient that drives flower production over leaf production, and tomato feeds are specifically designed to push fruiting and flowering. Apply it according to the package directions. Water it in well, and the vine will channel those nutrients toward the August flower buds that are forming right now on the new growth. Water deeply and consistently. The second bloom depends entirely on the vine having enough moisture and nutrients to fuel a second full round of flower production on this year's growth. A stressed, thirsty group. Two clematis in July will produce a weak and sparse second flush at best. A well-fed, well-watered one will put on a display that rivals the spring show. If you are finding this helpful and you grow clematis or any flowering vines really, consider subscribing. Every week there is a new video covering seasonal care, garden problem solving, and the kind of plant knowledge that saves you years of trial and error. Group 3. This is the easiest July to manage of all three groups. Your Group 3 clematis is either blooming right now or getting ready to peak in the coming weeks. The flowers are forming entirely on this year's new stems, the growth that shot up from the base after winter. Your main job right now is to enjoy the show. Deadhead individual spent flowers as they fade to encourage more blooms later in the season. Each spent flower removed signals the vine to push energy toward unopened buds rather than seed formation. If the vine is looking tangled or sprawling beyond its support, you can lightly trim the longest wayward stems to keep it within bounds. But do not cut hard now. You would be removing stems that still have flowers forming for August and September, and there is no reason to sacrifice those blooms when the light trim accomplishes the same tidying. Water Group 3 deeply in July, just as you would the other groups. These vines are doing heavy work right now. They're flowering, setting seed on spent blooms, and still pushing new growth all at the same time. That takes a tremendous amount of water, and a drought-stressed Group 3 vine will drop its flower buds before they open. A deep weekly soak when rain is scarce keeps the vine flowering strongly through the rest of summer. The real event for Group 3 is the late winter hard prune, and this is worth marking on your calendar right now. In late February or early March, before new growth begins, cut the entire vine down to 12 to 18 inches from the ground. Every stem, the whole thing. It looks aggressive, and the first time you do it, you will feel like you are destroying the plant. You are not. Group 3 clematis regrow completely from the base every single year. The fresh stems push up fast, climb your trellis or fence, and produce a full round of flowers by summer. This is the only group you can cut to the ground, and it is why Group 3 varieties are the most forgiving clematis you can grow. Mark late February on whatever calendar or planner you use. One hard cut in late winter gives you full regrowth and full bloom by summer. Now, there is a problem with clematis that garden centers have been creating for years, and it causes more pruning confusion than almost anything else. The mislabelling issue. Walk into a big box garden center or a chain nursery in spring and pick up a clematis in a 1-gallon pot. Look at the tag. You will often find a variety name and a color description, maybe a photo. What you will not find, more often than you should, is the correct pruning group. Some tags list no group number at all. Others list the wrong one. Large retailers frequently sell Group 3 varieties with generic care cards that describe Group 2 pruning, advising a light trim instead of the hard cut that the vine actually needs. A gardener follows that tag, prunes lightly year after year, and ends up with a tangled mess of old dead wood that only blooms at the very top where a few new stems manage to push through. The mislabeling is not intentional. Mass-produced plant tags are often printed in bulk for entire product lines, and the care instructions may have been written for a different variety in the same shipment. But the gardener standing in the aisle with a tag in hand has no way to know that the advice printed on the label is wrong for the specific plant in the pot. If your clematis tag has no variety name, or if you have lost the tag entirely, ignore whatever care instructions you were given at the store. Use the bloom timing identification method from the beginning of this video. Your own observation of when the vine flowers is more reliable than any mass-printed label that may have been written for a completely different variety. If you want to confirm your variety by name, take a clear close-up photo of the flower and the leaf shape and bring it to your local extension office or a reputable independent nursery. Many extension agents can identify common clematis varieties on site, and they will tell you the correct pruning group along with the name. Your county extension office is a free resource that is wildly underused by home gardeners, and clematis identification is exactly the kind of question they handle regularly. There is one piece of clematis advice that nearly every gardener has heard. Clematis want their roots cool and shaded and their tops in full sun. Head in the sun, feet in the shade. This has been repeated in gardening books and passed over garden fences for generations, and it is excellent advice. But almost nobody knows the biological reason it works, and understanding the biology helps you apply it more effectively. Clematis roots are negatively thermotropic. That is a technical way of saying they physically grow toward cooler soil temperatures and away from warmer ones. They are not chasing water, they are chasing cold. In a planting hole where one side bakes in the afternoon sun and the other side is shaded by a rock or a clump of ground cover, the roots will preferentially extend toward the cooler side. Roots exposed to hot soil do not just suffer passively, they actively stop extending, growth halts, and nutrient and water uptake drops sharply. The vine above ground stalls, and the gardener wonders what went wrong when the answer is literally underground. Place a flat stone, a piece of slate, or even a thick ceramic tile over the root zone on the sunny side of the plant. Plant a low-growing ground cover like creeping thyme or sweet alyssum around the base. Spread a 2 to 3 inch layer of organic mulch across the root zone, keeping it a few inches away from the main stem. The stone is not just blocking sunlight. It is creating a temperature gradient, a zone of cooler soil right next to a zone of warmer soil, and the clematis roots will grow preferentially toward that cool zone. You are giving the roots exactly what their biology demands, and the vine above will respond with stronger growth and heavier flowering because the root system is operating at full capacity. This is why that old piece of advice works so well. It is not gardening folklore, it is applied plant physiology. Clematis are heavy feeders, every one of them, across all three groups. A vine producing dozens of large flowers is burning through nutrients at a rate that casual fertilizing cannot keep up with. The feeding schedule is the same for all three groups, and it has three key moments spread across the growing season. The first feeding happens in early spring, when new growth begins to emerge from the crown. This is the fuel for the initial push of stems and leaves. Use a balanced fertilizer or spread a 2-inch layer of compost over the root zone as a slow-release base feed. The compost does double duty here, feeding the roots while also keeping the soil cool and moist as temperatures climb. The second feeding comes after the first flush of flowers finishes. For Group 1, this powers the bud development happening inside the new summer growth. Group 2 uses it to fuel the second bloom cycle, and Group 3 needs it to sustain the ongoing flower production through summer. Use a tomato-type fertilizer with high potassium for this second feeding, because potassium drives flower and fruit production over vegetative leaf growth. The third feeding happens in early September. This is a final nutritional push before the vine begins winding down for dormancy. It helps the plant store carbohydrates in the crown and root system, building the energy reserves that will fund next year's spring growth and flowering. After this September feeding, stop fertilizing. You do not want to push soft new growth in autumn that would be killed by the first hard frost. 3 feedings per year: spring, post-bloom, and early September. Balanced or compost in spring, high potassium tomato feed in summer, and one more balanced feeding in early fall. This schedule applies equally to all three groups. It is simple and it works. If you have struggled with clematis pruning confusion and you want one vine that will bloom no matter what you do to it, here is the variety to plant. Sweet autumn clematis, known botanically as Clematis terniflora. This is a Group 3 vine, so it gets the hard late winter cut and regrows entirely on new wood each year. It is hardy in zones 4 through 9, which covers the vast majority of American gardens. Sweet autumn blooms from August to September in cascading clouds of tiny fragrant white flowers that can completely cover a trellis, an arbor, a fence, or a pergola. The fragrance is strong enough to fill an entire yard on a warm late summer evening, and it draws pollinators by the hundreds. The vine grows vigorously, reaching 20 to 30 feet in a season, so it needs a strong support structure. But that aggressive growth is also what makes it so forgiving. You can prune it hard, cut it lightly, prune it at the wrong time, and it still comes back and blooms. For anyone tired of guessing which group they have and wondering whether they pruned correctly, Sweet Autumn is the clematis that simply works. 3 groups. One question to identify yours. Spring bloomers. Leave the new growth alone right now and let it build next year's flower buds in peace. Repeat bloomers. Deadhead the spent flowers and feed with high potassium fertilizer for the second flush coming in August. Summer bloomers. Enjoy the show this month and mark your calendar for the hard February cutback. Once you know your group number, Clematis goes from the most confusing vine in the garden to one of the simplest. The rules are clear, the timing is predictable, and the results get better every single year as the vine matures and the crown builds its reserves. Which group is yours? Drop it in the comments. And if your clematis finally bloomed this year after 2 years of nothing, tell that story because every gardener staring at a quiet young vine needs to hear that patience pays off.